Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan, MSP. It's yes, too much content. I know I've already done another kind of extra video, but I wanted to do a separate one on the Patriot thing. It's just in itself, it's quite breaking. I just have my tuppence to give to that topic. So now onto my usual Ukraine War update extra video to give you the extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into, to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Welcome along this journey with me. Where are we going to go to first? Actually, I want to do a bit of uh, debunking here, a bit of disinformation. And this is on the Ukrainian side here. So there's a video that's been doing the rounds over the last few days, and people are now starting to delete it because they think, as I do, that it is disinformation. It does seem a little bit dodge. And the video is basically a bit of drone footage suggesting that there are three soldiers. One of them, they're walking along, and the drone drops a munition here. It explodes. It injures one of them, and as it injures them, the other two realize that this guy's injured, and then go and uh, basically start beating him up and nicking his stuff. And the idea is that this gives you an indication that aren't the Russians, terrible, etc., etc. Some people argue that this is real. Some argue it is fake. So this is where they start beating him up and nicking his stuff, etc., etc. Right. Just a couple of points to this that make me think, yeah, I'm not 100% sure about what's going on here, or I think it's a little bit dodge. First point is this explosion, right? So if you look at the explosion, that looks really CGI. And when you compare the point of the explosion to what it looks like afterwards, there's absolutely no difference in the ground before and after the explosion. So have a look at this explosion. That looks really CGI. And then it comes back to exactly the same. So if I compare that ground to that ground, there's absolutely no change. That's after the explosion. That's before the explosion. So you're looking in this area before the explosion, after the explosion. This is not a single bit of difference. And when you look at this is classic like Photoshop type CGI, and then it just eventually merges back to what it was. And that's really enough, I think, to show that this is fake. I don't know how it's been put together and whether these. So there's, I've seen someone saying that actually, when you start seeing the shadows don't operate like they should do, and there's a weird bit here where the shadow goes underneath this guy. So this guy's head, the shadow there is not on top of his leg. It kind of goes underneath it, which suggests that there's something funky going on there as well. Kind of goes underneath, and then they get it to go on top of him. So I think there's something dodgy about this. It might be true, but there's a large percentage chance that this is indeed a fake. You can see lots of analyses on this or on different sort of social media accounts and whatnot. Yeah. So be wary of claims coming out from both sides, and be wary of your own confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is where you ascribe more value to any kind of evidence that supports your already held views. So if my views are that Ukraine are the good guys, Russians are the bad guys, Russians are horrible people. Sorry, Russian soldiers are horrible, like humans, morally speaking. Like, I'm being really simplistic here, so I'm giving you an example. So if that's my position, then if I get information that confirms that position, I will ascribe more value to that information, kind of intrinsically, than I would ascribe to information that counteracts my position. So if I see like Ukrainian soldiers being horrible, if I see Russian soldiers being good, I'll say, I'll look for issues with that information, with that evidence, and try and undermine it. Whereas I might not do that to this, and I say, yeah, nah, and I'd give that evidence a kind of like a 53%, value. I'm kind of being really arbitrary here. And the evidence that confirms my position, like a 94% value. I value that more. And so that I end up I reinforce my own already held views with this information that confirms that view. And I generally dismiss and don't give value to information that disconfirms it. That's confirmation bias. If I was to take that information that is contrary to my uh, already held belief and really consider that, that's where we get, and I often talk about this, sorry to bore those regular listeners, that's where you get cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is your disharmony in your brain when you have a core belief that comes against evidence against that belief, and you get disharmony. Your brain hates disharmony, but unfortunately, things like confirmation bias will then like start minimizing that evidence to hold your core belief, or you adapt your evidence to your core belief. So your core belief overcomes your that contrary evidence, or you dismiss it out of hand, or whatever. Things will happen, and it's almost always the case that the core belief maintains, and the contrary evidence is somehow adapted or dismissed. It's very rare that you go, oh, I need to change my entire belief system because, or my core belief here, because that evidence is contrary to that, and actually that evidence holds, and I've evaluated it, and that evidence is good. Now, what do I do? So just be aware of that. We are all victim to that. Okay, moving on. I wish that more Americans and Europeans were aware of the ubiquity of genocidal rhetoric on Russian state television day after day, as Julia Davis points out, and she's painstakingly documented, shouting from the rooftops. This is a really good point, and actually made me think quite a bit. All those people that you know who are really dead against this war, or dead against, like for example, America getting involved, EU getting involved. If you have pro-Russian, if you know pro-Russian friends, or anti-US, anti-EU intervention friends, if you have people in your family that are like that, it would be really interesting to sit them down in front of 2 hours of that genocidal rhetoric and then say, now do you see what's going on? Like, you and I, we've been watching this for months and months and months, and actually, it's kind of normalized. We're like, yeah, yeah, that's what we expect from those mentalist propagandists. But actually, for people who just see like the headlines and don't deal with this stuff in the depth that we do, but kind of are believing the head confirmation bias. They are watching news sources that confirm their already held beliefs. This should be an area that should shift them in some way. Like, it's really difficult to feel empathy, sympathy, moral sentiments towards, like good moral sentiments towards someone who is advocating for the mass murder of almost an entire nation. So when you show some of these propagandists, the two people who in your friend group or friendship group or family group who are predisposed to maybe defend Putin's actions in some way, I I think there'll be some really interesting cognitive dissonance going on there, right? Uh, we I think that kind of rhetoric, as terrible as it is, needs to be shown a lot more to people who are wavering. You know, if you show that rhetoric and go, you know, someone like Tucker Carlson really could have done with watching a shed load of those propagandists say their stuff. Oh, right. Okay. So they're advocating for burning children and drowning children, as some of the propagandists were um, earlier on in this war. Yeah. Okay. How do you justify that? How does that sit with your position? Right. Okay. Moving on. Let's do a Mick Ryan thread, the retired Australian general. So, over the past few days, there have been a succession of reports about Ukrainian advances around Bakhmut. Multiple reports indicate that Russian forces have withdrawn to positions further to the north of the city, in the vicinity of Bakivka Reservoir. That is, I could show you on a map, but hopefully you'll remember. Has been almost a year of fighting over Bakhmut. It is a battle over a small city with minimal strategic value, but which has attained high political value because of several visits by the Ukrainian president and Russian desires for the symbolic victory. The Ukrainian assaults, resulting in Ukrainian territory liberated from the Russians, are some of the most significant observed in 2023. There are several possible explanations for the Ukrainian attacks around Bakhmut and their success in seizing back ground. I will explore each of them below and then provide an overall assessment of what we have seen, noting we only see a partial picture. First, it could be just a local counterattack. This is one possible explanation for the events of the last few days. The Ukrainians have demonstrated the ability to learn and exploit opportunities in a much better fashion than the Russians have throughout the war. Now, an important point, because actually the Ukrainians haven't piled in a shed load of resources north and south. They haven't routed the opposition, like the enemy, in such a way that they are taking massive swathes of territory with, rolling over with like dozens of tanks and APCs. These are actually fairly small counter attacks, really localized, and they are having success. But they're having success because the Russians have culminated so much; they've run out of momentum, morale, resources, so on and so forth. So they're relatively easy pickings. One might claim. Well, I am claiming, and I think that this there is good rationale to suggest that actually this is no more than just some localized counterattacks. What I have said is actually if the Ukrainians, with limited resources, as in not dipping into their counteroffensive resources, with the limited resources they already have positioned in their rotations and whatnot in around Chesy VR and behind, if they can use those resources to uh, attempt an encirclement of Bakhmut, and get the Russians to panic and kind of capitulate, whilst not affecting their counteroffensives, that would be amazing. And I kind of get the sense that that's what they might be trying to do. But hey, what do I know? Adding to the case that this is just a local counterattack is that the northern Ukrainian assault was not accompanied by other large attacks in other sectors of the city or in other areas near Bakhmut. I would agree. And there are quite a few places where they could be attacking. I've been thinking they could be attacking further to the north as well, north of Krasnohora, uh, right up past Solidar. But that hasn't happened, it seems. While Russian mill bloggers reported Ukrainian troops attacking towards Kromova, and the Third Brigade has attacked south of Bakhmut. I don't think that, damn my fingers. I don't think that this offers any real evidence of a much broader operational push. These are more likely to be counterattacks that are part of the normal conduct of a larger defensive operation, where local commanders are given the authority to attack where the opportunity presents. A second explanation might be that the Russians have culminated. Military doctrine defines culmination as the point at which continuing the attack is no longer possible and the force must consider reverting to the defensive posture or attempting an operational pause. Now, it has been clear for some weeks that the 2023 offensive, overseen by Gerasimov, which is almost a template of his 2022 invasion model, 4 to 5 axes of advance, and of which with a decisive force, has been a failure. Russia has not captured any significant military objective of military or strategic value and has occupied a very small additional part of Ukraine. It has also squandered massive amounts of manpower and materiel, which Russia needs to defend those parts of Ukraine it occupies. So, are the Russian losses north of Bakhmut the initial signs that the Russian forces in this area have culminated and are unable to sustain offensive operations? Possibly. I actually think both of the first two options are the case. But at the same time as Russian forces are withdrawing under pressure from the Ukrainian assault, they continue to make small gains in fighting through the central and western parts of Bakhmut. Multiple sources report that Russia continues to attack in these areas. Consequently, while the Russians may be close to culminating in their attack on Bakhmut, they retain some tactical momentum. However, the overall Russian offensive in the east and operational level campaign probably has culminated. A final explanation might be that the Ukrainian counteroffensive has begun. The only certainties about the Ukrainian offensives to come are that they will occur somewhere in Ukraine, probably in multiple locations, and that they will probably surprise us and the Russians. It will only be retrospect that we will fully understand when the official preliminary phase of their offensive operations has begun. Strategic planning, preparation, and shaping began back in 2022. General Zaluzhny telegraphed the offensives when he stated in the December 22 that may the soldiers in the trenches forgive me, it's more important to focus on the accumulation of resources right now for the more protracted and heavier battles that may begin next year. So for all the reports of strikes and shaping activities being undertaken by the Ukrainians over the past few weeks. The reality is that the Ukrainians have been conducting strategic shaping for 6 months in preparation of the next series of large offensives. It's a really good point. And what Zaluzhny is saying here is that the entire Bakhmut defense has been a shaping activity in terms of shaping the battlefield. In other words, attriting the Russian forces, fixing them for the counteroffensive to come in early summer, late spring. The entire last 6 months of Ukrainian defense in Bakhmut is a shaping operation for the coming counteroffensives. Now, that's not something I considered, but actually makes total sense to me. And actually, this has been, as the quote from Zaluzhny states, that's fairly explicitly what he's saying. So yeah, my inclination, says Mick Ryan, is that Bakhmut gains do not indicate the Ukrainian offensives have begun, but the defense of Bakhmut could be a key element of the Ukrainian preparations for their offensive because of how it has fixed Russian attention and drawn in Russian forces. I completely agree. So I don't read Mick Ryan's threads before I read them with you. So when I sometimes jump the gun and say something and actually Mick Ryan says it later, I'm sorry for that repetition. But also it means that my thinking is along the same lines. And actually, if I'm thinking the same as Mick Ryan, then hey, I'm in good company there. That's exactly what I think has happened. Anyway, the reality is that we only ever have a partial view of events in war, no matter the level of transparency offered by military and civilian sensors and analysis. The fog and friction of war remains a key element of battles, operations, and wars. Having lots of information does not always make us wiser about what is actually occurring on the ground. As such, with incomplete information, it is difficult to draw a conclusive view of the events of the past few days around Ukraine. The Ukrainian attacks are most likely to be local counter-attack activity that is occurring against the background of higher level final preparations for the Ukrainian offensives to come, and it will be informing those preparations. Despite the uncertainty about the true meaning of these Ukrainian attacks around Bakhmut, I think one thing is certain. The attacks at Bakhmut show the Ukrainians are ready for a larger fight, and if they show the same creativity, determination, leadership, and purpose they have throughout this war, the Russians are in a huge amount of trouble. I completely agree there. Yeah, really agree with Mick Ryan. Spot on. I'm going to go. I was going to do. I'm going to leave this. I'm going to have this a shorter video because I've given you too much stuff already. But in my next extra video, I'm going to talk about the difference between the S300 and S400. Someone asked in the comment thread today, what's the difference between them? Because I accidentally said S300 when I was supposed to say S400. He's like, hey, you misspoke. But what's the difference? Good question. So I was going to go through that. I'm just going to finish with some more. It's the wildlife segment. But this one's a bit of a different one here. Holy cack, these geese have picked sides. This is so over. Now, interesting bit of footage here. Now, notice how these soldiers are actually trying to be quite quiet. And they've got a procession of geese following them, having a quiet little honk to themselves. They must be thinking, seriously, guys? Really? This is not the right time. And as you can see there at the end, he was whispering. I mean, this is genuinely, these guys are trying to be quiet. 3 geese suddenly joined the Ukrainian armed forces soldiers as they were moving through the thickets. They followed the soldiers busily, trying to keep silent. This reminded me, when I was at school, I learned about an attack on a Roman, was it on Rome itself? How holy geese saved the Republic during the first sack of Rome. And there was, where is it? It's here somewhere. Yeah. Though official word was received, the attempt to greatly risk the lives of all who resided in the Capitoline for the Senoni scouts discovered the messenger's footprints and figured out that there was a way to scale the cliffs. They chose a night with a full moon and sent their bravest warriors up the cliff. The ascent was so skillful that neither the Roman sentries nor their dogs noticed anything, but the geese did. The geese were actually a sacred animal of Juno, kept and fed on the Capitoline despite the dwindling food. They began quacking and honking relentlessly, and some of the sleeping Romans were awakened. The first to respond was a man named Manlius. Manlius did not hesitate for a second and charged a few Gauls cresting the top of the cliff. He killed one and pushed another off the cliff with his shield. Soon other Romans joined in the fight and killing the remaining Gauls as they came up, etc., etc., etc. In other words, the honking geese woke up the Romans to the Gauls who were attacking, trying to silently attack by scaling cliffs at night. Now, this really reminded me of that, like geese, but this time the geese are on the side of the Ukrainians because actually they're keeping pretty quiet for geese. I don't know what happened after this, but genuinely, those geese could have been a real nuisance. It wouldn't surprise me if they cut that and then the guy gets out. Well, no, if he's going to get a knife and try and attack those geese, like that's horrible as that is, they would make one hell of a sound. So really, the best thing to do is just try and ignore them, so that they remain quiet. But I wouldn't expect in the wildlife segment that we've seen time and again, where we've seen badgers and beavers and hedgehogs all being treated with respect by the Ukrainian soldiers. I don't think they would have attacked the geese there, and it wouldn't have been in their best interest. Anyway, that's wildlife segment for the 16th of May 2023. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.